I'm Heather Marie Montilla, and you are watching PBS Books. Thank you for joining us. PBS Books, in collaboration with the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, is pleased to host a conversation with Professor Henry Louis Gates Jr., who is the executive producer, host, and writer of Making Black America Through the Grapevine, with scholar Professor Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, who is the former past president of ASALH. Making Black America is a four-part series that explores Black Americans' century-long history of establishing communities and attaining social, political, economic success in the face of racial segregation. It premieres on PBS stations across the country starting on October 4th. During this series, Henry Louis Gates sits with noted scholars, politicians, cultural leaders, and old friends to discuss the world behind the color line and what it looks like today. Making Black America takes viewers into an extraordinary world that showcases Black people's ability to collectively prosper, defy white supremacy, and define Blackness in ways that transform America itself. Let's take a moment to watch the trailer.
Watching the game of Bid Whistle is like going to the Apollo on amateur night. There is a magic to this game that makes it the Black national pastime.
Where'd that queen come from? I think they cheat.
Throughout our history, Black Americans have, with great ingenuity and imagination, created a world with its own values and rules. A world defined by unfettered racial self-expression. A world behind what W.E.B. Du Bois called the veil.
When we talk about networks of Black people, we're talking about different types of associations. There's a social type, fraternal, and intellectual organizations.
How were each of you shaped by Black social institutions?
I grew up in African preschool. I didn't learn Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I learned Coal Black and the Seven Simbas.
What does Black joy mean to you?
Black joy means being in a safe space and feeling free, where you can really be yourself and shed that skin.
Wherever you have a large concentration of African Americans, you have business districts that rise up, that meet the needs in these communities.
Annie Malone and Madam C.J. Walker basically developed hair straightening. Was that a good thing for Black beauty?
Part of our magic is that we can do anything with our hair. I can straighten it, I'm still gonna be dope Julie, Black Julie.
Black social networks, Black institutions, they are like barrier islands. They protect us from the storms of this country.
When we come together, what time is it?
So what happens when we begin to see the deterioration of Black institutional life?
There have been people who've argued that our community was better off before integration.
When I was growing up, everybody in my sphere was Black. There was just that sense of everybody in this together. I think we've lost that.
When we look now in the 21st century, we see many of the same issues our Black foremothers and forefathers faced: economic disenfranchisement, anti-Black violence.
No justice, no peace.
But we're facing them without many of the institutions that Black people had to sustain them during the first round.
I constantly am thinking about what it means to occupy my identities. I do surround myself with Blackness.
As long as race counts in America, Black networks and institutions will always matter.
From the founding of the Prince Hall Masons to Black Twitter, African Americans have forged networks in their own image as the ultimate act of resistance and survival.
Just a reminder, Making Black America airs on PBS stations across the country starting on October 4th, Tuesdays, 9 p.m. ET. Check your local listing. Now, I'd like to welcome a partner from ASALH.
Hello, I am Marvin Delaney, President of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. We use the acronym of ASALH as a sort of short name of our organization. I'm pleased to be here to present this evening's program, the premiere of Making Black America Through the Grapevine. This is a conversation between filmmaker Henry Louis Gates, Jr., Ph.D., and scholar Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, Ph.D., who is also the former past president of ASALH. As the name of our organization indicates, ASALH is dedicated to the study, publication, and dissemination of knowledge about African American life and history. Since February 2021, ASALH and PBS Books have developed and offered virtual programs that celebrate the work and accomplishments of African American writers and scholars to foster dialogue about African American contributions to the arts and contemporary thought in communities across the nation. We are thrilled to promote this conversation as part of our 107th annual conference. ASALH has been having its annual conference to bring people together and to celebrate and further its mission. This conversation provides important insights into the work of Henry Louis Gates and takes viewers into an extraordinary world that highlights African Americans' ability to collectively succeed in opposition to white supremacy while defining Blackness in ways that transformed America itself. The documentary series showcases Black joy. We hope that this conversation brings you joy and happiness. Back to you, Heather.
Thank you. Well, we'd like to actually thank all of our library partners, more than 1,800 strong across our great nation, as well as PBS stations who are sharing this very important content with all of you. But most importantly, we'd like to thank all of you for being here. So now the moment you've been waiting for. It is my extraordinary pleasure to introduce Professor Henry Louis Gates, Jr. Henry Louis Gates, Jr. is the Alphonse Fletcher University Professor and Director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard University. Emmy and Peabody Award-winning filmmaker, literary scholar, journalist, cultural critic, and institution builder, Professor Gates' most recent books are Stony the Road, Reconstruction, White Supremacy, and the Rise of Jim Crow and the Black Church. This is our story. This is our song. He has also produced and hosted more than 20 documentary films, most recently, The Black Church on PBS and Black Art in the Absence of Light for HBO. Finding Your Roots, his groundbreaking genealogical and genetic series, is now in its 8th series on PBS. It has been called one of the deepest and wisest series ever on television, leveraging the inherent entertainment capacity of the medium to educate millions of Americans about the histories and cultures of our nation and the world. The recipient of 56 honorary degrees and numerous prizes, Professor Gates was a member of the first class awarded Genius Grants by the MacArthur Foundation. He became the first African-American scholar to be awarded the National Humanities Medal. It is my pleasure to welcome Professor Gates.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Well, to moderate the conversation today, it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham. Evelyn is the Victor S. Thomas Professor of History and of African and African American Studies at Harvard University, where she has been one of the faculty since 1993 and has chaired both the Department of African and African American Studies from 2006 to 2013 and the Department of History 2018 to 2020. Professor Higginbotham is also the immediate past national president of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, which was founded in 1915 by Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history. She is a co-author with the late John Hope Franklin of the 9th edition and now 10th edition of From Slavery to Freedom, 2021, a pioneering and prize-winning scholar in African American women's history. She co-edited with Henry Louis Gates Jr. the 12-volume African American National Biography in 2013. Her numerous awards include most notably the National Humanities Medal awarded by President Barack Obama in September 2015, and most recently, the honorary doctorate from Carnegie Mellon University in May 2020. I'd like to welcome Professor Higginbotham.
Thank you. It was May 2022 when I got the honorary degree. So I'd like to start by saying what a pleasure it is to be back here, Heather, on this program, and especially with my good friend and colleague, Henry Louis Gates Jr. Skip, because
it's such an honor to have you. And, you know, I know that this is such an important film, and it is my pleasure to actually turn it over to you to be able to moderate this conversation. And we look forward to hearing more about the networks and the organizations that have really made Black America and made America. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's my pleasure again to be here with you and to be in conversation with my friend and colleague, Henry Louis Gates Jr. So I'd like to start with just congratulating you, Skip, on so many amazing documentaries, one of which won an Emmy and several that have been finalists for the Emmy. In fact, 2 of your documentaries to appear this year have been recently nominated for Emmys. One for your documentary, Frederick Douglass, in 5 speeches, and the other for your wonderful documentary on the Black church. This is our story, this is our song. So I know so many people wonder, how do you come up with ideas for documentaries? And specifically for this one, The Making of Black America, Through the Grapevine. Tell us your secret. What is your inspiration this time?
Well, thank you, Evelyn, for taking time out of your busy schedule on Martha's Vineyard, tearing yourself away from lobster and Chardonnay in order to do a little scholarship. I'm deeply appreciative. I didn't think you were going to show up. I didn't think you were going to get off the beach. I love stories, as you know, just as you do. The thing that characterized Du Bois, Carter G. Woodson, your father, Carter G. Woodson's assistant, John Hope Franklin, in so many ways, indirectly your mentor, my mentor, was the love of story. That, you know, the old hymn, I love to tell the story of Jesus and his own, you know. And I love to tell the story. I was always interested in stories about Black people. I first was exposed to African American history through the pages of Ebony magazine in the columns of Lerone Bennett Jr. And Evelyn, I started reading them when I was about 14 or 15. I was born in 1950, so that's 64, 65, when Black people were in the news. Dr. King was in the news all the time, the civil rights movement. But I would savor the columns of Lerone Bennett. I even wrote to him once, Evelyn, I don't know if I ever told you this, and said, "Dear Mr. Bennett, I think that you should collect your columns into a book." Through the grace of God, I got the opportunity to make a documentary in 1994, and that was the beginning of my second career. So I love to write, as you know. I love to tell stories. I love to laugh at corny jokes, but I love the tradition. And in 1999, in response to this new technology, Anthony Appiah
and as you well know, and I edited Encarta Africana, the first digital Black Encyclopedia Africana. And as part of that, we created a Black website, africana.com. And a few years later, with Donald Graham, we created theroot.com, which is still going strong today, and which is the leading Black website for news and entertainment in the United States. And I cite these examples only to say that I am always looking for a new way to tell the story, a new way to reach people. Because Evelyn, I think one of the curses of our people is that we've had to reinvent the wheel every generation, as you know. Somebody would do really good bibliographical work, or they would edit a concordance to an author, or a dictionary, a biographical dictionary, a huge compendium like The Progress of the Race, you know, those books edited at the turn of the century. And then they would go out of print and they would be lost. And Carter G. Woodson was not only a great scholar, he was a great entrepreneur. And a lot of what I do, I take from Carter G. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson founded his own imprint, Associated Publishers. He founded his own 2 magazines. I mean, the Journal of Negro History and then the Negro History Bulletin. He was always thinking of ways to tell the story. We're going to create Negro History Week. Then we're going to do little books for children. Then we're going to create a curriculum. So, and he was acutely aware, and we have more resources in a year probably available to us than, sadly, either Du Bois or Carter Woodson put together had in their whole lifetime in order to reach people. And so I was determined, once I got into this, the profession of filmmaking, that I was going to use it to the best of my ability to reach not thousands of people, not even hundreds of thousands of people, but millions of people with the story of our ancestors, so that we could create basically in 4-hour segments, or sometimes 6-hour segments, chapters of the larger narrative of our people. And not only in the United States, starting with Juan Garrido in the 16th century, let's say, and going up to Black Twitter, but in the Afro-Caribbean. As you know, I did a series called Black in Latin America. I've done 3 series on Africa, most recently Africa's Great Civilization. So I'm very much a Pan-Africanist, and I'm very much an Americanist, an African-Americanist. So that I have a larger program in telling different aspects of the Black experience in different ways, not in the way that you and John Hope Franklin do in chronological order, but thematically, you know, jumping around. It's sort of like what occurs to me. So right before COVID, I would go to, as you well know, I would go to movies. You and I have gone to movies on Martha's Vineyard. I'm a movie junkie. I watched Top Gun Maverick last night, streaming downstairs and I was riveted the whole way. I love movies, and when I go to movies, and I'm hoping that COVID abates enough so we can go back to Kendall Square together, I sit there and I think, wow, this is how they're telling that story. And I could do that. I watch Ken Burns. I watch Stanley Nelson. I love to watch documentaries. And I get ideas about, wow, you know, I don't have to tell 5 years of African-American history, though I did that with Many Rivers Across. We won an Emmy for it. I can divide it up by a theme, or I could just tell a little chunk like the Harlem Renaissance. The next series we're mapping out now is on the Great Migrations. I want to tell the story of the movement of 6 million African Americans between 1910 and 1970 from basically the former Confederacy to sites north, Detroit, Chicago, Milwaukee, Pittsburgh, Boston, New York City, and west. But then the reverse migration that started in 1970 back to the South, made possible by the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, and as amusing as it might sound, air conditioning, making air conditioning affordable, so it made living in the South in the summertime livable. And then, Evelyn, I want to tell a third migration, which, as you well know, between 1990 and 2000, more Africans migrated willingly to this country. And I want all of our viewers to listen to this fact because it's amazing. More Africans migrated willingly to this country between 1990 and 2000 than came directly from Africa over the entire course of the slave trade. That's amazing. And then finally, gentrification. That would be the fourth migration, with upper middle class white kids going back to the inner city and taking over communities that their ancestors were living in 1910 before the Great Migration. So that's just another one. It's a long-winded way of answering your question, and I apologize for that, but it's just an extension of the work that Carter Woodson started. And Carter Woodson wrote an essay once in which he said, there are stories in the Black tradition that any Hollywood producer would be blessed to tell on film. And he was right. And now I'm just one of people. I'm just one of many, many documentary filmmakers and feature filmmakers. Shonda, Oprah, Ava DuVernay, thousands of people who are embracing this medium and telling their story. I think that unlike them, I have a Ph.D. Unlike them, I'm a professor of African and African American history. So that my perspective is from the inside out. And I surround myself, I populate my films with experts who are actual scholars. I think Brent Staples wrote to me and said, in our Reconstruction film series, which you played a major role in, he counted them, and he was right. We had over 50 academics, and over half of them were women. And so I'm pleased to be able to give voice, to provide a platform for other scholars in our field so they can tell the story too.
I really do want to commend you for your dual career because, well, you know this story, but our audience probably isn't familiar with it, that when you recruited me to come to Harvard.
I begged her, ladies and gentlemen.
And I was having a conversation with my late husband, Leon Higginbotham, and we were seriously deliberating this when someone pointed out to me that if I came to Harvard, by the time I arrived, Skip Gates would be already off to Hollywood. Well, I can honestly say you stayed at Harvard. You taught your courses, some with me. You built the department. But you are now actually, in addition to your illustrious career as a scholar and university professor, you are known to millions of people as a film and a TV show host.
It's such a blessing.
So,
it's a miracle.
Yes. So this second career that you've had, I mean, I do think you've spoken to it in a way that complements your teaching because you have your show, The Roots, that has millions of followers, but it's a story about history. Mm-hmm. And so you're telling history as you do the show. Mm-hmm. But I also want to take you to a way of thinking about this in your current documentary, the spirit of it, mm-hmm. because we're really talking about people who live in many ways more than dual lives, but they certainly have lives that, if you just look at the realities of the oppression of Black people, that is one experience, and yet there is another experience, one of fulfillment, one of accomplishment and joy. And I know about this particularly from writing about the Black church, because I'm writing about people who were literally domestic servants, unskilled laborers, often exploited and not given respect in their places of employment, and yet in their churches and in their communities, they were esteemed. Mm-hmm. They were respected for their talents and accomplishments because they were officers and leaders in their churches, or they were members of clubs and they had a rich associational life. Mm-hmm. They were members of ASALH and they celebrated Negro History Week. So this was an alternate universe. Well, that alternate universe is what your documentary, Making Black America Through the Grapevine, that's what that is really about. So first of all, tell us about the grapevine for some of your audience who may not know what that means other than hearing Gladys Knight or Marvin Gaye sing about it. Tell us about why that was important to put in your title. And the other is just talk about this alternate universe, or what Du Bois called behind the veil. What is this? Tell us about it.
Well, so many, if you came down from Mars, right? This is like to echo our colleague Derek Bell, who's transition, of course. If you came down from Mars and you watched you watched the news and you watched so many feature films and so many documentaries about the Black experience, what would you think? You would think all our ancestors did, all we do is talk about white people, to talk about suffering, to talk about oppression. And of course, we do talk about those things. We mobilize, we have consistently mobilized and fought against segregation. We fought against slavery first. We fought against anti-Black racism. Then we fought against Jim Crow segregation. We fought for the civil rights movement. We fought for the Reconstruction Acts, and then when they were basically denuded, we fought to get them back through the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not all we did. That's not all we did. If you go to a barbershop, but when I was growing up, we'd go down the barbershop 5 miles away, Mr. Comey Carroll. You'd sit there all day. You didn't have appointments. Nobody even thought of that. You would just go to your time was called, your number was called. And you would sit there and hear every kind of lie and signifying and playing the dozens and gossip and rumor. It was fabulous. As a little kid, I couldn't wait to go. I was sorry when my number was called because I was learning so much about the Black experience. And I wanted to let our viewers know that if the 24 hours in the day, Black people are not sitting around talking about politics and white racism for 24 hours of those, for 24 of those hours in a day. Far from it. We are doing what every other human being is doing. We're talking about love. We're falling in love, falling out of love. We're worried about our children. We're raising children. We're building families. We're worshiping God. We're questioning the nature of existence. We're laughing. We're cooking. We're eating. We're exercising. We're reading magazines, fantasizing about the good life. We have such a sense of elegance and style. We're buying clothes, making clothes, reinventing ourselves over and over again. And we are communicating miraculously with each other through a network that has its origins deep into slavery. And I'm not talking about the 19th century. I'm talking about the 18th century. One of my favorite quotes, when I came across this, I almost fainted. It's from the diary of John Adams, the second president of the United States. And it was written in 1775, a few months after the battles of Lexington and Concord. And this is what he said, and I quote, "Black people, quote, have a wonderful art of communicating intelligence among themselves. It will run several hundreds of miles in a week or a fortnight." Evelyn, that's before the American Revolution. And then Booker T. Washington, as you well know, in his classic Up From Slavery, gave it a name. And I quote, "Though I was a mere child during the preparation for the Civil War and during the war itself, I now recall the many late at night whispered discussions that I heard my mother and the other slaves on the plantation indulge in. These discussions showed that they understood the situation and that they kept themselves informed of events by what was termed the grapevine telegraph." So I wanted to make a story. I wanted to tell the story of the history of the grapevine, which manifests itself through all of these social networks. When Du Bois published The Philadelphia Negro in 1899, he has this line that cracks me up. And he says, he's listing different kind of cultural institutions, social institutions in the Black community. And then he says a line saying, and so many fraternities, sororities, and fraternities that I can't even name them. So the epigraph for this film is, what did Black people do? When the color curtain came crashing down, they replicated as best they could the larger white world from which they were excluded. And they did it in every arena of activity, intellectual and social, professional and recreational possible. When our ancestors weren't admitted to the American Medical Association, what did they do? They formed the National Medical Association. When they were, I have 3 generations of dentists in my extended family. They were all members of the National Dental Association, including my brother, because they were excluded, not now, of course, but traditionally from the American Dental Association. There were Black Ski Associations, Black Bridge Association, Black Golf Association. That they wouldn't let us come to the beach because of nudity and the potential for sexuality. The beaches were one of the last institutions integrated in America. But we had Highland Park in Maryland. We had Sag Harbor in Long Island. We had the Inkwell on Martha's Vineyard. Literally, ladies and gentlemen, for every institution white people had, we had a Black counterpart. And among the organizations we touch on in the series, I love these, are of course the very first, the Prince Hall Masons. And Prince Hall had the idea and approached the official Masons organization 1775, and of course was rejected by the Americans, but eventually in 1782 would get a charter from England. The Grand United Order of Odd Fellows, the Protective Order of Elks in the World, the Galilean Fishermen, the Brothers and Sisters of Love and Charity, the Order of the Eastern Star, the Independent Order of St. Luke, and my favorite, the Royal Knights of King David. And even in Amos and Andy,
of course,
Amos and Andy is the whole action of every episode takes place in the Mystic Knights of the Sea Lodge Hall. That Black people just created all these organizations. And as you said, no matter how badly you were mistreated in the larger world 6 days a week, you would have lodge night, or in the case of the church, you would have Sunday service or Wednesday prayer meeting or whatever it was. You would have a night where you were king, where you were the kingfish, where you were the elder. You know, in church you could fire the preacher, and there was nobody more powerful than a Black preacher. But if you were on the board of elders, whatever it was called in your particular church, you hired and you fired the Black preacher, and everyone knew that, especially the preacher. The National Black Nurses Association, the National Bar Association, the National Association of Black Journalists, et cetera, et cetera. And we replicated the world in the same way that our Jewish sisters and brothers did. Jewish people could vacation in the Catskills because they weren't allowed to join WASP country clubs. And that's what we did. And the Chitlin Circuit. We invented the Chitlin Circuit, a network of entertainment that went throughout the South and the North, and through the Howard Theater in DC, the Apollo Theater in New York City, theaters all across the country, from the East to the West. And that's, you remember in Men in Black, Evelyn, they're looking for this lost world. And the clue is that's on Orion's collar. And they're looking in, because, you know, Orion is a constellation. And it turns out it's been in front of them the whole time on this cat that you've seen for the last 2 hours, whose name is Orion. And he has this diamond collar around his neck. And the whole world that they're looking for has been shrunken and put in that collar. That is the metaphor I use for life behind the veil. The Black world is right in front of everybody, but the only people who could see it were members of that world. And I wanted to raise the color curtain, to use another metaphor of Dr. Du Bois, to lift the veil, to use his prime metaphor. And I got the idea when we were all suffering from George Floyd and the trauma, and we were you know, locked in our homes, trying not to die. Remember, like sanitizing the mail. If you had groceries, not eating out, if you had groceries delivered, you had to let them sit outside. If you got takeaway, you had to nuke it for 2 minutes. And I thought, yes, you know, we come together and mourn. We come together and protest, but we also come together and celebrate. And being Black is a celebration of life itself. And that's what we put in a 4-hour series called Making Black America Through the Grapevine.
Thank you. For those who are just joining us, I'm Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, and you are watching PBS Books. I am here with my friend, Henry Louis Gates Jr., who is the executive producer, host, and writer of Making Black America Through the Grapevine. It's a 4-part series, which will premiere on PBS stations across the country starting on October 4th. Okay, let's get back to our conversation. You know, what you're saying is so important. Just briefly, talk to us about the 4 parts, because you've got it in somewhat of a chronological order. Mm-hmm. And you've talked to us about Prince Hall, but so people will be excited about the idea of this continuum. I mean, the thing about Prince Hall that's so powerful is that it still exists.
That's right.
You know, and so it's all of these stories, for many of these organizations, they are over 100 years old. I mean, I must tell you, ASALH in this year is now 107 years old.
That's right. I'm a lifetime member.
Yes. And so we have, you know, our sororities and our fraternities, all of that. But just give us the 4 parts. Tell us what the 4 parts are.
Well, our one starts with Prince Hall and 1776, and it goes up to 1900. And we talk about fraternal orders, and we talk about the African Grove Theater, 1821, New York City, Black people doing Shakespeare, and not just Othello. You know, they have their own theater. It was short-lived, but its legacy would continue through the great actor Ira Aldridge, who would become internationally renowned, the first internationally renowned Black Shakespearean actor. And then starting in 1830 at Mother Bethel, the first colored convention. And as you know, Evelyn, there was a colored convention, a movement of free Black men in the North. And they were annual gatherings where people would debate how we should move forward. One of the most famous is the debate between Frederick Douglass and Henry Highland Garnett, when Douglass thought Garnett was being too militant. And so they squared off there. And the minutes of the convention movement have been transcribed. They're online. And Gabrielle Foreman, who's editing a brilliant website about the colored convention movement. And then the birth of free Black towns. We tend to forget that not only in parts of cities like Philadelphia, Boston, New York, Washington, Charleston, and New Orleans, there were segregated Black towns, but there were also all Black towns. Black people created spaces that thrived, even in Indian territory, when our Black ancestors were owned by the 5 civilized tribes, as they were called, the Creek, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, Cherokee, and the Seminole. And when they were forced to leave the richest cotton growing soil in the world and move to Indian territory, which was its own country, and then, which in 1907 became the state of Oklahoma, Black people formed their own all Black towns after they were freed out there. We talk about the 1881 Atlanta washerwomen strike with Black women doing domestic work, including laundresses, recognizing their worth, and they struck for higher wages, and they won. And then the ever presence of Black literary societies. I remember when I was growing up, Evelyn, the elocutionists would be coming. They would say, the elocutionist is coming. And they would come to the church on Sunday afternoon or on Saturday, and they would read from a collection of great Black speeches and Black poems, and with great dramatized plays. Man, that was bad. That was fabulous. That was as good as the movies. And then in hour two, which goes up to 1930, which is the first real year of the Great Depression, we talk about the spread and the growth and development of the HBCUs. We talk about the Divine Nine at the HBCUs, though the first one was formed at Cornell. They really got their life at the HBCUs, and more specifically through the capstone of Negro education, as it's called, Howard University, where 3 generations at least of my family's graduated. Alpha Phi Alpha, the first of the Divine Nine, which was founded at Cornell in 1906. Alpha Kappa Alpha, Kappa Alpha Psi, Omega Psi Phi, Delta Sigma Theta, Zeta Phi Beta, Phi Beta Sigma, Sigma Gamma Rho, and Iota Phi Theta. How about that, Evelyn? And then Black banking under the genius of Maggie Lena Walker. Remember, I mentioned on my list of Black organizations, the Independent Order of St. Luke. She built that into a successful financial institution called the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank. And then Annie Malone, of course, and Madam C.J. Walker, who were pioneers in the industry of Black beauty. And then Marcus Garvey. You know, not enough scholars have given Marcus Garvey his due. Marcus Garvey created the largest mass movement of Black people in history in his time. It would take years before anybody summoned or mobilized as many Black people as Marcus Garvey did, and not only in the States, but in Jamaica, of course, where he was from, in Cuba. I found out to my amazement. So Garvey was a visionary. He just wasn't a good businessman, but he had a dream, and it was a grand Black dream, and I want to give him his due. Do you know, one of my students counted in my graduate seminar this year, Garvey talked about the new Negro, Evelyn, 512 times.
Right.
He talked about it more than Alain Locke talked about it, and he had his own definition. The new Negro looked like Marcus Garvey, but that was it. So then we move into the Harlem Renaissance, which is really called the New Negro Renaissance at the time, and it was only named the Harlem Renaissance after 1940 by Langston Hughes. The third hour, we go from the Great Depression to 1965 through the passage of the Voting Rights Act, and we talk about rent parties in the 20s and 30s. The numbers. My mother loved to play the numbers, and she would ask me, Evelyn, she would go down to Miss Mason, did hair, and my mother would go to Miss Mason to get her hair done, you know, once a month or whatever it was, and she'd say, Skippy, what's the number? And one time, Evelyn, hadn't started school. I gave her the number. The number was 3 digits, and they hit. And man, there was a line of Negroes around our house a mile long. Skippy. And I'd walk down the street and they'd rub my head, say, you want some ice cream? What's the number? What's the number? And we tell the story of Gus Greenlee, the famous numbers king, who bought the Pittsburgh Crawfords, one of the greatest teams in the Negro Leagues. And we talk about the Negro Leagues. We talk about the social activism of the Alabama Sharecroppers Union during the depths of the Depression. And then the Green Book, of course, which cemented Black American together through the vast number of Black recreational institutions, hotels, gas stations, restaurants where you could travel without stress, as the Harlem postal worker Victor Green put it. He cataloged 70,000 Black-owned hotels, nightclubs, restaurants, and local businesses. So it's and very important to remember that and celebrate that. And then the political protests, starting with World War II, led by one of my true heroes, A. Philip Randolph, and the founder of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and how he called for the Double V campaign and threatened the first March on Washington. And fortunately, he was at the second March on Washington. Then we talked about Ebony and Jet, John Johnson, another visionary, starting in 1945. And as I said at the beginning, my introduction to African American history was not Du Bois and not Carter Woodson and not you even, dear Evelyn. It was Lerone Bennett Jr. in the pages of Ebony magazine. In every barbershop, in every beauty parlor, in every Black doctor and dentist office, there was Jet and Ebony. And then starting in 1955, the Montgomery Improvement Association. We have that echo in name on the Universal Negro Improvement Association. That was a nod to Marcus Garvey. And that, of course, was founded by the people of Montgomery, Alabama, who picked a young, charismatic, Boston educated and Morehouse educated Martin Luther King Jr. to lead the movement. And then finally, from 1965 to the present, Black Power and the Black Arts Movement. Black is beautiful.
I just want to say, one thing about this, because on the one hand, sometimes we hear people say that this world that was created only because we were shut out of the white world. And while there may be some truth about that, it is certainly not all true, because the desire to have our own culture, to express it, to have power over our own things, to just have a sense of fun and to play cards like Bidwisk, or to just have these glorious moments when we see Joe Louis beat Max Schmeling. When these are more than simply fleeting moments. There's something healing for the soul. They're the source of our resilience. And what you've done is that you can read about it, and you can read people like Du Bois, and it's beautiful, or you can read others who talk about these experiences and they move you. But Skip, in your documentary, we can see it for ourselves. We can see that world come to life, to visibility. I told Skip that as I was looking through the images that will appear, I saw my own father.
I couldn't believe it.
There. And there will be people, Skip, there will be people when they see those Greek performances, the step shows, and when they will see people they recognize.
Yeah.
They may even recognize themselves. You've given us our history not simply in 3D. You have given us our history in high resolution visibility. So thank you. Thank you for this documentary.
Oh, thank you.
I know it's going to be I know it's going to be received splendidly.
Thank you, darling. The difference that people should keep in mind is the profound one between enforced segregation and willing association. Despite the fact that now, under integration, we have a choice, the membership in these Black fraternities and sororities and Black social networks has, if anything, increased, not diminished at all. The HBCUs have never been more vibrant. People want willing association. You want that nurturing, the warmth and comfort of the blanket of Blackness. And that's what we celebrate in this series. Thank you, Professor, for the honor and pleasure of being interviewed by you.
Thank you, Professor Gates. It seems like time has just flown. It's gone so quickly. We have run out of time, folks. I'd like to invite Heather to close the program.
Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so very much, both of you, for the time, for Evelyn, for your questions, for guiding this conversation, and Professor Gates, thank you for this gift, for this amazing series, this visual, digital record of Black history, tradition, culture, love, joy, laughter. I can't wait to see the whole thing. I've already seen bits and pieces, and it is fabulous. So thank you both. I want to remind everyone, do not miss it. On October 4th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, check your local listing on PBS. Making Black America Through the Grapevine will be airing. And you can also stream it at pbs.org. Until next time, I'm Heather Marie Montilla, and happy reading.